So I'm very excited to be here with Dr. Mike Trubetskov, although he didn't want me to call him Dr. Mike, but, do it at least once at the beginning. Mike, how the devil are you?
Really good, really good. Early morning in Australia. Excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So we have a great mutual friend. You've been doing some stuff for Christian, which is really exciting for Color Audio Cult.
This is my first big course that we're launching, venture into education, which I hope to continue. And I'm very, very excited to share what we've created together.
Christian really wants me to talk to you about kind of the combination of guitars and synth world. He's like, that's a big deal for him. He keeps telling me over and over again that you are the king of it.
I don't think so at all. But yeah, we'll get to what is prevalent in a niche and how that goes around and what is popular and why synths in metal are sort of, I wouldn't say kept as a secret, but there's not much information out there. And I have a theory about that I've been thinking. But stepping back, my experience in the industry and how I started is I played classical piano since I was 5. So classical music, Russian music, Tchaikovsky, and then international music like Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, etc. So I learned that. And when I was a teen, I picked up the guitar, as we know, and I started playing Muse. That was my first big inspiration. And as you know, there are some synths in Muse's music, Origin of History. Big fan. One of my biggest inspirations back in the day. And then I started listening to Rammstein. So that...
That's where it all went. Ew.
Exactly. What drew me to heavy music probably was Rammstein and Muse to begin with, the first place. And in Rammstein's industrial element, synths were a big, big factor. And that was probably one of the differentiating factors that made Rammstein's music stand out in the market back in the day, making them a bit different from other heavy bands, right? And so that sort of was ingrained in my blood back in the day, and I started my career having that at the back of my mind. And then I just picked up a synth. So I was a piano player, always played piano and synths. So less piano, more synths. And over time, progressively learned VST instruments when I was a teen and always kind of wanted to combine that in a good way. But, took a while to learn it. And now I have a Prophet Rev 2. So use that quite a bit in my productions.
I've often said when I listen to modern metal, I'm not talking about the classic metal of, 60s, 70s, and even through the 80s, but that's sort of like, to me, I feel like one of the big changes, you can tell me I'm wrong, of course, was sort of Judas Priest, late 80s. That's when it suddenly started to really get super, super intense, very, very heavy, but everything kind of like, I wouldn't say square waved in the late 80s, early 90s, but like pretty close. When I listen to like really, really dense, very heavily produced EDM, I think to myself, a guy that could mix a really dense, heavily produced EDM track could also mix a really heavily produced metal track. To me, they sound very, very similar. And I don't mean, the actual sounds, but the production ideas, that kind of almost mathematical kind of jigsaw puzzle of fitting things in so that they're slamming the whole time. So one of my theories is that why wouldn't synths work in it? Because they live in the same kind of world.
Very much agreed. Talking about modern metal production, and especially there's a guy called Buster Otterholm, probably you know of him, a great producer, and his approach to new and modern metal is actually EDM-like approach. So he likes to blend very synthetic drum samples, huge sounding, distorted, saturated, long sustained kicks and snares, amongst with very low tuned and compressed guitars. That creates that square wave, bricks, which you put on top of each other. And indeed, synths come in to fill in the gaps. And it can be atmosphere, it can be enhancing that heaviness and finding complementary tones to the guitars, or it can be hooks and lead melodies that are upfront, like Bring Me the Horizon kind of thing. But my theory of why we don't know that much about synths in metal is the following. So I believe that there are less key and synth players in metal rather than guitarists. And so guitarists don't know much about synths just naturally. That's one of the things. And second thing is, how pockets of producers doing their things. Like in the 70s, maybe we've had producers doing analog synths. Right now, it all revolves around the guitars. In synths in metal, there are different libraries, different types of sounds, and people just have a much wider kind of tone gap that they apply, and people just don't ask sometimes. And artists go to a producer which creates a certain style with his outboard or software synths, and he just has that in mind. He doesn't think about it too much. He just does it. They come to him, they have the sound, and then there is another producer. So it's all scattered, and there is no global resource that would bring that together. And just the experience is widely different, and it's less standardized than your one guitar tone that works, the 5150 kind of thing. That's my theory right now.
For you in particular, living in this world, what are the sort of tips and tricks? What are the things that enable you to make those two worlds live together so easily?
So I guess the starting point, and something that every musician in metal world that wants to expand onto this territory, synths, blending synths and guitars, the first idea they want to explore is indeed making synths follow the guitar. So create synths that follow the guitar riffs. And that's how I started as well. And all you have for that is MIDI. So maybe a Guitar Pro, a tablature for the guitars, or maybe you have to program it out, but you have to have the exact MIDI line that follows the guitars. Yet, once you have that, you have all the opportunities open up for you. So you can drop a software synth. Vital is a good one. It's a free one. You can find some soul-like or bass presets, and right away you drop them in and they sound quite good because they're complementary to the guitar tones. So with a guitar tone, you are limited by your tone that stems from an amp and a cab mainly. It's a filter, and that creates a tone. There are wide tonal possibilities within that, but still it's limiting. Whereas for the synths, you open up that box. You don't have that filter anymore. I mean, you can put a cab IR on synths. I've done that, and that's cool. But there is a digital type of different distortion, right? Different saturations. You can bit crush the synths. You can fuzz up the synths, or you can find wavetables. So it's all limited just by your creativity that work differently, that have different sounds. You can modify the envelope so that they're more percussive sound, more mad. And you can blend that and see what actually works. So you can just tweak this. And this is where creativity comes in. This is the very first starting point. It's natural, it's easy, and it yields really cool results. I started my productions when I was younger, less experienced, with that exact thing in mind, and just gradually built onto getting better at it, basically. And at some point, yes, so you've mentioned how synths can become the dominant role of this in productions, and that can be the case. I started by bringing that in subtly to my productions for my clients, and they loved it. Sometimes they asked for more. I've done that. And then recently I experimented on YouTube with a video where I completely took guitars out and replaced them with synths. Now, no guitars at all. It sounded kind of cool, Mick Gordon kind of vibes, but not fully resolving the genre. It didn't really work out. But once I blended the guitars back in, maybe 20 or 30% back.
Right.
So the ratio makes a lot of difference. But you can put synths up front if you want to and create a new sort of EDM metal kind of genre.
I'd love to hear what it was like as a guitar version, and then as a keys version, and then, of course, the combo platter where you picked and chose which one to use where. It sounds like a fascinating exercise. Is it something you would kind of recommend people to try themselves to really get an idea of how synths and heavy guitars can live together?
A bit of a pitch, but yes, we do have a course with Christian, and we will have exactly that possibility for anyone who has the course. Because in the course, I go through those sounds individually. I show how you can dial in different synths that follow guitars, other synths as well, but focusing on this category for the moment. And I supply all the MIDI and wave files. So you can go ahead and play around with this, blend this together, or dial in different sounds, take in presets, tweak them. So there are a lot of opportunities for this. But if you don't want the course, you can just grab a Guitar Pro of your favorite song, find a cover, so you have the guitar, or play it, and then do the same thing yourself. It's not too hard. So the process isn't that difficult. The difficulty comes in when choosing the right sound for the synth so that it complements the guitar but doesn't step onto it too much, that saturates it nicely, and that actually works and sounds pleasant and gives the right atmosphere. So the problem or challenge with the synths in metal is that they can go so many different ways. They can sound cyberpunky dystopian. They can sound 80s kind of funny sort of upfront vibe, or they can sound anime-like, and anything in the middle and more. So you have to be quite mindful about what sounds you choose, why and how. And this is, so I learned it as a producer, so first as a mixing engineer, then stemming that as a producer. The skill when you combine and layer sounds. I don't think it comes that easily. So you have to have quite an expertise in this, take the time. But otherwise, that's just the universal layering type of skill, which comes in handy in any productions we do.
Have you found a kind of a secret source of a certain kind of synth patch, that would work really well with a heavy guitar sound that actually amplifies the heavy guitar into new realms of like insane heaviness? I'm sure a lot of people are thinking that, like going, how heavy could I get?
Yes, I do. I have a few go-tos for this. With my Vital presets, have some presets available for free on my YouTube, more presets in the course, and just some of my own. Maybe I'm just using those ones, recycling. What it comes with, it's a saw wave or square wave or a combination of both. And these are pitched either into 1 octave or 1 octave apart. And with a saw wave, you can go quite low. So the lower you go, you know how the guitars come down to drop E, 1 octave below your norm, or drop F, and then the synths can come down there. And certain wavetables, like a sine wave, they just don't sound right when shifted and pitched that well. They lose the body. But some of those wavetables actually do sound still decently good. If you modulate them, if you modify them a little bit, that's where I found, with the right application of the ADSR block as well, so attack, release, sustain, for making it percussive but still retaining the body, and have that super heavy low end and low mids that stem from it as a saturation harmonics. And then what you do is you saturate it more, you distort it more with different types of distortion. Clipping, soft clipping, hard clipping, tape goes quite well. You may need to EQ into that distortion as well. But otherwise, this is the general principle. Fat lead type of sound, not much of a reverb and delay, fast and attacky with body, and low, big low end that works with the guitar line.
What's your combination? Is it a combination of using plugins with the sound, or is it almost entirely created at source?
With the sound, I try and tend to get as close to the final as I can. My plugin processing chain for the synth is minimal. It's an EQ and then reverb. That's about it, to be honest. Most of the time. Maybe some limiting on synth bus or clipping. That's about it. Maybe multiband. Nothing really over the top. So I try to shape the tone in the very software or hardware synth as I can. And because in Vital, at least, which is a free synth, you have a lot of options. I tend to rely on the synth and the synthesis process rather than our traditional tone shaping possibilities in the DAW. So what got me really excited is your idea about sterile productions versus more organic productions, where you have your real instrument and you can have hiccups, you can have missed notes, and that adds some life to the recording if executed correctly. And you can paint the picture with those colors of our human imperfections. Whereas the oppositely, when you have synths, especially the digital synths, and you have MIDI, which is perfectly quantized to your 16th notes, for instance, there is none of that going. And that is something that modern metal, A, strives for. People want polished productions, and B, being criticized for. Some people, purists, hate that. They want more life out of those elements, guitars and synths. With heavily edited production, drums gridded, bass, maybe MIDI bass, guitars super gridded, edited out to be perfectly on the grid. We sort of take out that life from the production. And sometimes it makes sense because the productions are so dense and involving that you can't do anything else about it. But I believe that, so having synths put in and adding that sterility, gluing it together, can do damage to it as well. And that's why I'm thinking that using analog synth and outboard synth can open more possibilities because, well, firstly, you can play that synth. And I encourage everyone to actually have a MIDI controller and play those lines, no matter how simple they are, because that adds human velocity, that adds some discrepancy, that adds an element back to the production. But also with my analog synth, at least, you play the part, no matter how many times you play it, it will always be a little bit different. The waveform changes because it is generated by analog chains. They're not perfect. And that adds so much musicality. When I was choosing my Prophet at the store, I put on headphones and I got carried away for 30 minutes right away. I knew I had to get that synth. No other synth did it for me. There's a fine balance between that human element and refined sterility. Let's now look at creating synth pads and atmosphere. Basically, what you have to know about this is these are the opposite of creating the punchy synths that are up front and follow your guitars. These will have slower attack and release, more sustain, and much more reverb to blend this in. And even though this seems to be the most straightforward thing in synths, you just press a button and it gives you a pad sound that can complement your section and add depth to it, there is more to it. Starting off with this spirit box section here. Right? Some movement and modulation in pitch, which we'll get onto next. A pad, traditional pad. And a less traditional pad here as well. This is just atmosphere for the moment. Moving on to the pad with melody. And the next one as well. Next up, let's look into those pads here, which complement the main melody. And let's see how you can achieve that same thing. Do you have to be a piano player to get this level of depth and harmonization for this? Not really, but you do need to invest into some sort of music theory understanding in order to reach that level. If you just hold the power chord without changing your voicing, it can become pretty dull and boring. In this section here, let me mute all the synths for the moment and consider what are the guitars doing. These are just the power chords, nothing more, and this can get really, really boring if you keep that same thing under your synths. If you want to go further and make it more musical, make it more captivating for your listener, consider adding some voicings and different chords. Instead of doing a power chord, I'm doing a major third chord here, then a minor chord here, which fits the scale this is something that you have to consider. Your chords must match the scale of the song, but then there are voicings, the extra notes that you add to make it more vibrant. Particularly for this power chord, instead of holding that out as the guitars are doing, I'm adding a third, minor third voicing note here. And this helps to lift up the transition and keep your listener more engaged and more keen to see what happens next, because it builds into the next section in a subtle harmonic way rather than obvious sonic way like your risers and transitions, which we will come onto a bit later in the course. Same deal here. I'm using the third, minor and major third chords throughout this section, and then stepping back onto the power chord. Looking at this line here, this basically serves as a main hook line. And then it repeats. The note itself and the part plays a big difference in lifting up that section, because you can see that those notes do not quite repeat, even though in this section here the chords are the same, and I could have just dropped this key progression 4 times. I didn't. I played around with some movement upward and downward, adding some harmony to it as well, and making sure that some of those notes complement and harmonize with the main melody. And this creates a subtle depth to it that you as a listener want to go back to and revisit, because it gives something interesting to you. I gotta say that I have studied music theory when I was young at a music school, but I do not think that I'm at a level of explaining this to you in enough capacity. Therefore, instead of me learning this on the spot and likely not providing a concise information, I had a chat with ChatGPT. We discuss the music theory applications for bands like Currents, Architects, Bring Me the Horizon, Polaris, Invent Animate, and also Northlane. ChatGPT actually did a good job, went through the right scale theory relevant to those bands, so you can go ahead and program synths based on these scales in mind and not the whole selection of scales that you have. We also have common chord progressions and then the relationship between guitar and synth harmonies. And this is very important, which we have covered in the course, and we covered different ways for the synth to not clash with guitars, but obviously it all starts with the right part. Therefore, this is crucial for your understanding here. And then you can see the application of this theory to those specific bands. And I hope that this document serves you valuable. Now we need to talk about choosing the right sounds for your hooks. This can be sort of intimidating and sort of not so much either, because you just need to look into the right category of the sounds. In my experience, obviously based on the vibe of the production, here are the elements that can work to support your vocal lines or be the main hook. These are string elements, brass or similar synthetic brass, saw wave-like leads, upfront synths, and that's about it in my experience. So obviously strings create a more intimate feel, more maybe gothic kind of vibe, depending whether you want to achieve that or not, but strings can work really well if you want to support the main melody without stepping onto it too much. This works when you have vocal melody and this goes underneath. Similarly, some bells and kind of more percussive but really soft sounding background bells can work really well for this. Otherwise, massive saws, leads can be a great contender. Now, in this course here, I have not synthesized these elements from scratch. I have, though, went ahead and modified some of the vital presets. So, instead of me showing you the creation of those presets, because there was a lot of this in this course, let's go through the presets now, the freeware ones, and find whether there is anything that can fit this section here. So, there's this Supper Pluck thing. And I don't mind that,
this could have worked as something really backgroundy and plucky. Then there is this string section pad. And this sounds great, but there is an issue with it. It has too long of an attack. I have modified it to create this string hook preset, which sounds like this now. And you can hear that all of the difference that has been implemented is opening up the attack and thickening up that sound. Because these sounds are normally created for EDM music, electronic music, hip-hop, pop, not metal, where we have so much going on and it is difficult to cut through the mix in any way. Therefore, we have to make those presets thicker, more gritty, and more aggressive in a way. Let's go into the lead category and see whether these can work. So for keys, can work if you're after some sleep token vibes. This is a cool one, bell-like synth. Let me modify it with you here, and all I'm hearing is the wrong ADSR. Let's see. Kind of sounds a bit weird, but you get the idea, at least the direction that we're taking with it. There are different envelopes in this preset here attached to the oscillators. You have to be mindful about that and make sure that you're tweaking the right one. Keep going. Let's see this one. Not too bad. This one is great. This one 100% would work. Let's hear it in the mix. A piano vibe without being a piano, which I like a lot. And now let's finally get indeed to those leads I mentioned at the start of this section here. Yeah, let's see. It's a bit dirty. You can see that there is not much of a selection of leads in those free presets, unfortunately. Yet this one sounds cool, but for some reason it is out of pitch. There we go. So this sounds great, and in the context, sounds good. I like it, and as a test, I wanna enhance it and give it to you in this course as well. What I'm hearing is sort of a consequent vibrato when the note plays. At some point, it gets into woo. Now we have to think about which parameter can give us that vibrato effect. We have to think about the principle of what vibrato is. I only applied one kind of modulation for these parameters, but I don't want a static frequency of modulation to occur. I want it to gradually come in and become faster and faster. And that's where I would have liked to try applying an envelope to those parameters on top of this modulation. All right. Now that sounds quite rather cool to me, so I will give this preset to you as well. In the context, pretty happy with that.
You said you started off as a classical piano player. I remember when you were explaining that, and I was thinking about the music you create and this, the way that you blend heavy guitars and synths together. I kept thinking to myself, it's very much like working with orchestra, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the beauty of orchestras, that a great composer with incredible arrangements knows how to use all of those instruments that provide a full frequency response and can intertwine and create some of the most incredible music of all time. Do you feel like that was a big part of your process coming up, understanding, classical music to that kind of level?
Absolutely. I feel like metal comes close to the complexity of the classical music. Maybe not the dynamics, but the complexity for sure. And the ability to understand how counterpoint melodies work, how harmonic chord progressions work, and how you can blend melody, a hook melody, and a chord progression to make it more interesting. I think it's a big, big part of applying synths in metal, because sometimes when I'm asked to do synths on a production, it's all executed and recorded. I can only fill in those gaps. And I normally do that with something more subtle rather than upfront synths, maybe some strings, some pads. But what I feel like adds so much depth to the production, which is otherwise a little bit flat, is doing the counterpoint with the chords themselves. So you have a melody, you have some melodic progression with a guitar riff, and then you have different chordal structure, which adds depth of a different movement to those lines. And I believe that this is just something that people can feel, not necessarily hear because it is low in the mix, it's blended, it's reverbed, but it adds a lot more. It adds another layer. So for sure, classical music has helped me so much with the melodic and harmonic aspect of adding those elements. And actually, I started scoring some short films because of that, blending those. So obviously more of the symphonic element, but some guitars as well. So that's the opposite of metal and synths. You have classical music or orchestral music and some guitars. So that works both ways, which is cool. In the course, we have a mashup production, which is a 2-minute long song with songs by Spiritbox, Currents, Aviana, and Silent Planet. These are well-known bands in modern metal scene, and I created just myself. So I had that as covers. I put it together, and I've put synths on top of those lines. The synths that are there were synths that follow the guitars, synth pads and atmosphere, rhythmic synths and pulses, so something that creates rhythmic modulation, transitions, risers and drops, and hooks. So upfront melodies that you can use to enhance maybe vocal line or do something completely different with it. And I go through all of those. So in a mashup production, I just focus on each segment, each synth, and I explain the creation of the sound. I provide all the presets, free presets for Vital, and I provide all the MIDI lines. So the viewer can learn on how to create those synths. And I also go over all of the ideas and understanding of how to implement transitions, why pad sound differs from lead synth, etc., etc. So we went really deep, and Christian wanted more, which was fun. I normally, I feel like I talk too much sometimes and I limit myself, but Christian wanted more, and I got really excited and recorded another hour of content, chopped it, and there we have it.
I think it's going to do one of two things. I think this whole conversation and everything is making me feel quite passionately about this, that it's going to do one of two things. It's going to take the person that's trying to figure out how to blend their synths and guitars together and think to themselves, oh, now I can figure out how to make this work. And then, honestly, and more excitingly for me, and I'm sure this is what you want as well, is to inspire people to actually make music that isn't quite so cookie cutter. I think, this is the criticism that I think is leveled at modern metal, is, I'm sure you're aware, it is that sort of thing of like everything is just starting to sound the same, that we're teaching these same techniques all the time. And, Stephen Slate's a good friend of mine, and we were making a joke about, what is it, Slate kick, is it Trigger 2, whatever it is? We were joking about it, and it's like, yeah, he's like, it's on every single song. It's all the same, and that's fine. And don't get me wrong, it's safe. You go back to that stuff. But if this is going to help people think about this in a different way, then I'm happy. And then I won't feel like I'm listening to the same band over and over again,
There is that criticism for sure. When I wasn't listening to modern metal as much back in the day, I had that as well. I had that idea of separating productions, making a comeback of a more natural, real, analog sound, which is great and all. Not many people have access to that, and that's a whole different conversation. But when I started listening to those productions more closely, I realized that synths do make a major difference in those new bands. Silent Planet is a band that combine retro wave synths with modern metal, drop tuned. And then Spirit Box combine spooky synths, distorted, hollow-like, ghost in the attic kind of synths to their productions. A band Currents combine more traditional synths with some strings, etc. A band Evanescence combine gothic-like synths, like a gothic sort of symphonic metal in a modern reinvention. All of that is possible because of those synths. Some bands add industrial element to it, some add futuristic element to it. You can do some of that with the guitars, and people start to experiment more and more with pitch shifted guitars, chopped, fast moving guitars that create almost a synth-like atmosphere, but you're still limited with that tone. The whole soul thing, which Buster Otterholm invented, a very low-tuned, completely different genre, and I'm not proficient in that genre much, but it also blends atmospheric guitars, which are very far in the background, but you could use synths to even enhance it some more and add a different dimension and direction people go to. So all in all, I'm very excited for it as well. There are purists out there that feel like metal should only be executed as a band and everything else is not correct, not right. That's fine, but I feel like we shouldn't be limiting ourselves with music by any way, shape, or form. It's all, it's all limited just by our creativity and our ideas. As long as we're authentic, it doesn't matter what we use. It matters how we use it and why we use it, what kind of message we want to translate.
How do you deal with optionitis? How do you deal with the fact that, I don't know how many synths you own, how many virtual synths you own, but I'm imagining it's quite comprehensive.
Ambient sounds. I've lately been experimenting a lot with drones. So just an octave apart doesn't change and fills in those gaps with reverb and atmosphere. And now the selection of the sound itself does become the main thing that will set the section apart from another. For that, I use a lot of contact libraries, cinematic kind of scoring libraries. Honestly, I just click the preset in a mad state of mind up until I find something that I like. Maybe a good way to get out of that option paralysis, which is very real these days, is find one, like it, save it, and then quickly go to another option. Find another one that you like, save it, and then quickly A/B between the two. When you are working with minor changes, small subtle changes, your mind becomes very fatigued quite easily, right? However, in order to get out of that circle, if you have two viable options, which you can quickly jump and compare and say, oh, I like the rhythmic aspect of this synth, it pulses in a cool way, but this one fills in the gap better and better provides a better atmosphere. That's it. I work under pressure all the time because in metal, the budgets are not huge and I have to be very efficient to deliver for my clients. Really, that's all that it is about. So I just force myself to commit to whatever works. And yes, sometimes it may be a minor compromise, sometimes can be something that could be done again. And we do it again with my clients if that's the case. But in most of the cases, this approach works just fine. There are a lot of libraries. We have to be mindful about what we choose. We have to be careful. And I encourage everyone who goes into the market and buys a library to study it thoroughly before buying another one.
Do you have some favorites? Spill some beans. What are some of your favorite libraries?
My absolute favorite, top number one library is Damage 2 by Heavy City. This is not a synth library, it's a percussion cinematic library, but it has a lot of risers and drops, which are more cinematic. They're not really widely used in metal. I use that for transitions all the time. I think it sounds sick, it sounds gritty, very much suits metal. Not overly used, so that becomes a part of my sound. We also have Symphonic Destruction by Heavy City, which has strings, very saturated string and brass sections, work awesome for metal too, depending on the style though. For more digital type of synths, it's Farlight, Straylight, some other light by Native Instruments. Great library.
All the lights.
Yeah, all the lights. There is also Analog Dreams, which is a decent library for sure. And then reach out for my Prophet when I want a unique sound, when I want a more organic, less modern, more natural, more heartful feeling. Then I reach out for my outboard synth. And then I have a lot of Vital presets, which I honestly, all the presets that are provided in the course, I'm just using myself, to be honest. I dialed them in, I like them, and there's no way of me not using them. They're as good as they come. So just some custom built presets for Vital. That's about it. I keep it as simple as I can, to be honest.
Let's just say you are getting massive, big paddy synths, which are following the guitar lines very closely, if not identically. You're saying using Guitar Pro and creating MIDI and having it trigger exactly the part. How are you getting those two things to work together? Are you using dynamic EQs so that as the synth line changes, it ducks in different areas out of the guitars? Are you just using multiband compression? How are you doing it?
So this question seems simple, but in reality, it's not that simple. Let's start with the guitars, especially if we're talking about the guitar that is dropped to a very low tuning. Because of the frequency shift, the EQ curve shifts. You are essentially cutting what you used to boost and vice versa. So you're cutting 600 hertz now, you're boosting 500, you are cutting 300, and you're boosting 1 to 1.2K for the attack, not 2 or 3K. That's whole frequency shift. And for the synth to blend with that line, you gotta obviously pretty much put it as a jigsaw puzzle so that it matches and complements it. You need to, start with the right tone that carves out those frequencies, that doesn't step onto the mid-range. And this obviously comes with experience. But then you pretty much apply the opposite EQ curve. I don't do that religiously. I do take out low mids. And the way for the synths to cut through is finding the mid-range frequencies that don't clash with the guitars, maybe a bit lower than the guitars, maybe actually the 600 that you have cut from the guitars. And then adding the top end, you have more top end sizzle in the synth, 7 to 10K, and that doesn't sound unpleasant. With the guitars, it most of the time sounds pretty harsh at the top end. So you can combine these, and that digital top end helps to create that new atmosphere and let it work. Once you've done that, once you've carved out the sound, yes, indeed, multiband compression, the way I use it is, especially if we're talking about the orchestral synths, like strings and such, you can either duck the guitars with a multiband sidechain to the synth so that when strings come in, if it's a string forward type of production, guitars duck. And they don't sound small because strings fill in that gap. Strings come out, the guitars come back up because of this sidechain. That's obviously a traditional technique, but it works quite well. You can do the opposite, and you can duck the synths to the guitars. Heavy synths, the more you distort them, the more flat they become. So dynamics is important. The low mid dynamics, rumble, it's a bit of a problem. I don't use much of a dynamic EQ. I don't find the need for it in this case. But I do use track spacer, which is a reverse dynamic EQ, I believe. And that track spacer has been a lifesaver. You obviously, it's almost like a sidechain compressor, but it's a sidechain dynamic EQ, I believe. And then it comes down to which element you want up front, where and why. Once you have that informed decision, it doesn't become too hard to make them friends in the mix.
There's going to be a link down below here where you can get the course. If you join Cola Audio Cult, the course will be in there as well. But go check out the course if you want to get the course on its own. Mike, this has been a blast. I absolutely love this.
Has been a blast. Yeah. Really appreciate it.
Thanks ever so much for taking the time and sharing all of this great information. It's been wonderful. What I love, and for those people watching, this video is probably going to be pretty much the length that it took to film it. Quite often we film 2 or 3 hours worth of stuff and then edit it down to the best 40 or 45 minutes. I must say everything you've given has been gold, like really, really good stuff. Very, very focused. Very focused. It probably helps that you're very smart and it comes across that way. So I really appreciate it.
I'm just prepared as well.
Yeah, well, this is what you do and you do an amazing job. Mike, thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much, Warren. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Everyone, look down there below. You can see a link where you can check out the course. Please leave some comments and questions below. Thanks, everyone. So long, farewell, la vie de au revoir, adios, goodbye.